So hello, everybody. I'm Ann Iniguez. I'm a board member with the International Dyslexia Association's Arizona branch, and thank you all for coming. It's my pleasure to introduce Faith Borkowsky. She's the founder of High Five Literacy and Academic Coaching, and she's here to share with us her wonderful workbook that she has published. So I will go ahead and hand it on over to her. So thank you so much, Faith.
Thank you, Ann. And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So, I think one of the issues that parents face when they find out that their child has a reading difficulty or dyslexia is that people don't really understand the nature of it. They don't really know what they're looking at. Sometimes they think that it's just a delay, that they'll grow out of this, that eventually the school hopefully would be able to take care of these issues. And then they become disappointed and they get frustrated because the community doesn't really understand the nature of the problem. And unfortunately, parents only start to learn the nature of the problem after they're already deep into this. And, when I wrote my book, Failing Students or Failing Schools, A Parent's Guide to Reading Instruction and Intervention, it got a lot of recognition because people felt understood at this point. And I was a teacher sharing my experiences so that parents would be able to understand this in an easy way. A lot of times you look at these books and they're very academic in nature. And I wanted to make my book understandable, accessible to the average person who might not have this same background knowledge. And after I wrote that book, I had quite a few parents say to me, if I had this book earlier, it could have been so much different for me. And so as I was working with my students, parents would always break down and start crying to me and say, if I had known. But there were a couple of parents who just wailed like, if only I would have known. And that became the title of my second book. And the purpose of that book was to try to get young parents, new parents, interested in the reading process from the beginning, to understand that speech is directly connected to learning to read. And then I realized that some people needed to bring this information to their school district, and they didn't know how to bring it to the school district because, it's uncomfortable for parents. They always feel as though they're the enemy when they bring this up, and it becomes contentious. So I decided in my book, If Only I Would Have Known, to use characters and to make it a fictional family with these animal characters. And I put it into a graphic play format. And I decided to do the same for this workbook. It's called Can You See Me? And this is free and it's on my website, ifonlybooks.com. And I put this here so that parents could download it for free and use it with their PTA meetings and community organizations and have this discussion. It's really supposed to be meant as an action plan. So it's information, but it's meant to really have this conversation where everybody walks away saying something that he or she can do to help. And so that when you reconvene, that it's part of a bigger plan. So I just want to walk people through this a bit. I'm not going to read to you, so don't get scared. I'm just going to show you some PowerPoint slides. The document is in a PDF, but it's really small, so I put it on a PowerPoint so people could at least get the idea. But the purpose of this is really to show people that this is in plain sight. If you know what you're looking at, it's really in plain sight. And we could do so much along the way before these kids really fall off. So I'm going to get started just sharing some slides with you. Let me just get this. Okay, so it starts off with a mother, and it's this back and forth of, can you see me? Yes, I see you. That's kind of the change between both parent and child. And it's really meant to show how a child is growing up and all these people are part of this child's life. And they mean well, but they're missing all these major benchmarks along the way, all these signs that are right there that they're not recognizing. So the mother is watching this child, and it's through the voice of the child, the kitty cat, this innocent little cat. And the cat is saying, I'm in preschool. And, you know, it's so frustrating when people don't understand me. And this is common where there are little kids with speech difficulties, and you'll see the mother interpreting for the child because people don't understand whether it's an articulation issue or it's just not a complete sentence. And the child is getting a little frustrated along the way, but the mother thinks it's purely just a speech issue. And then what I do is I present information in between this fictional account. So it keeps going back and forth between the child and having encounters with people along the way. And it's infused with information that could enlighten people about the problem. And it could be a speech problem. It could also be a sensory issue. I don't think people realize how there are signs along the way that might not be directly connected to reading, but these are overlapping issues. And there are many children who have these sensory processing issues. They're fussy, they don't like particular foods, they get irritated by tags in their clothing. That doesn't mean it's going to be dyslexia, but these are these overlapping issues that along the way, when you add things up, could start painting a picture for parents and for other people who are with this child. And you see at the beginning, the little cat is very sweet. And the cat stays sweet until later on when it's just getting very frustrating. So here's the information. I put in information about language delays, articulation problems that people should know along the way. And then this child is ready for preschool. And then the preschool teacher is expecting this child to be able to use a scissors. And possibly there are loud noises in the classroom, and the teacher might expect the child to sit. And you'll see that, again, not necessarily directly connected to reading, but these could be signs along the way that there could be problems that are coming that would, it wouldn't be unexpected if we knew that these could be signs. And these are true accounts. All of the things I'm sharing with you are things that I've heard from parents. I always ask about early childhood. I always ask about speech and language delays, things that people should know along the way that you would hope that the schools would know about, but they don't. They think that this is just something that kids will grow out of. They go to daycare. The daycare worker might say that, oh, you know what? They're having trouble snapping and zipping and doing some of these things that require fine motor. Again, itchy clothing, things that seem to bother them, lights. I've heard this before. And it's not for all kids with dyslexia, but these are things that could be in early childhood. And then you go to a pediatrician, you take your child to a pediatrician, and the pediatrician examines the child, but never really makes that connection with speech and starting to read. And we would hope that that conversation would open up. And that's part of my book in If Only I Would Have Known, that it's this conversation with a parent and a pediatrician, that the pediatrician should be aware of these types of problems. But they don't make that connection with that late talking or trouble communicating. Now the child is school age and the child is in kindergarten, and the way reading is taught in the elementary school, these kids are expected to know sight words. And many kids cannot remember their sight words, or they're mixing up words just when they're supposed to be learning to decode, but they're given the wrong instruction from the start. That's a conversation. So rather than a parent having to go to the school saying, well, why are you giving my kids sight words? If it could be done in this story format, in this play format, in a way that doesn't make the parent feel uncomfortable. They could bring this workbook to school and say, you know what, could we have a conversation around this? This child, of course, is an extreme case, but the types of things that you would see along the way might help identify children. That's the point of this. It's not going to appear, all these things do not appear in every child, but it would start to open a conversation. That's what you want. You really want to get this conversation going. And this way, it's not pointing the finger at any one person. It's fiction. Nobody could feel defensive at that point. All right, now the child might need some help along the way. So occupational therapy might be recommended. And, you know, the child is saying, talking to us, saying, you know what, my classroom teacher is getting mad at me because I slump in my chair. I write with my head sideways. That's a sign. A lot of kids cannot hold their bodies upright when they're writing. They lean over, they put their head on the desk, they're sitting sideways. Things that teachers might think, oh, this kid is just lazy. Or, you know what, this kid is coming to school and maybe he or she didn't get a good night's sleep. But these are signs that it's a problem, something that we should be talking about. Speech, as we mentioned before, it's not just a speech issue. When kids mix up sounds and words and they have trouble rhyming, they have trouble identifying the initial sound, the final sound, the medial sound. These are all signs that they're going to have problems when it comes to reading. Phonemic awareness is the #1 predictor of a reading problem, and yet there are so many SLPs in school that are not aware of this connection. And the schools do not bring the speech and language pathologist into these meetings. Many times it's like a separate service rather than everyone talking to each other. It really should be the OT, the SLP, having a plan that works with the reading specialist and the classroom teacher. But it's treated almost as something that's separate, but it's really not. All of these factors play into each other, and parents need to know that, and the schools need to be aware of this. Physical therapy. It's not unusual rather, for kids to have problems with balance, coordination, and also have these other problems. As I said, it's actually unusual for dyslexia to happen in a vacuum. It usually happens along with other problematic areas. So we should be aware that coordination, balance, posture, not being able to hold yourself up and right is real. That's when you see a kid with dysgraphia, often it goes along with being able to hold a pencil, that's the fine motor, but also gross motor, being able to hold yourself up and having the strength in your core to write. It all goes together. I think parent groups need to understand what the symptoms are as well. That, you know, when kids come home and they don't have the strength to do their homework, it's not that they're being bad kids. They are emotionally drained from being in school all day long. And when kids go for tutoring after school, they are wiped out. It's so unfair to them that they have to go through a whole day of school, holding this stress in all day, and then often they're seeing tutors or they're going to other therapy, such as physical therapy, speech, you know, and they're exhausted. It's something that parent groups, when they get together, should be aware that it's not a behavior issue by itself. They should know to look at what's happening with reading instruction. Often these kids hold it in. So it's either these kids who are very quiet and withdrawn, or they start to become behavior problems. So if you look at the little kitty cat, this one is crying right now because, you know, he or she is misunderstood. You're going to start seeing that little cat change very soon. So we go from the preschool years into these elementary school years, and the frustration is building. And now all of a sudden, the child is seeing the reading specialist at school. And many times the reading specialist is not trained to deal with kids with these reading problems. I know I was trained in a way that does not align with the science of reading. I had to go for my own training. And only now is it starting to get recognized. It's changing a little bit, but certainly not fast enough. If you go on social media, it seems like it's changing rapidly, but it's not happening as quickly as it appears. It's just that the same people have the conversations again and again. So we're all in our own little club, but it's really not happening as quickly as we would hope. So it's not uncommon for reading specialists to still have guided reading levels and for these kids to be pulled out, getting leveled books. And these kids could stay at level A, level B, level C, and not move at all because they're not getting the right help. And then you have this parent who's starting to recognize it and questioning it. And then the parent becomes the outsider. And the school sometimes resents the parent who's questioning this. I hear that all the time from parents. You know, they said, oh, they become that parent. I don't know if anybody on here feels that way, that they become that parent, but they're not taken seriously. They're taken as that problem parent with the kid who can't read. That's the whole point of having a document that is something that you could have a conversation around without feeling as though it's only you. That's the point of this. And then I go on and I keep infusing this with information that's important for parents and for anyone who's working with kids to know. I put in some of the research, but I didn't want to overwhelm people with too much research. I want to keep it friendly and light. But the evidence is here. You will see kids going out to the nurse often. And that happens all the time. As soon as something becomes a little bit difficult, the kid has to go to the bathroom. Well, the nurse also should be aware that, hey, you know what? Maybe I'm getting this daily visit because there's an academic problem. Maybe this should be a conversation too. But often it's just, they think this kid just cries. We have to just let it go. Don't pay attention to it. Not a big deal. They send the kid right back to the room. You'll be okay. And again, it's not that the nurse is a bad person. Nobody here is a bad person. It's just the situation is misunderstood. That's what we're trying to get across and enlighten people. Again, now the kid is a little older and it's silent reading time, right? Dear time, drop everything and read. And this is the kid who can't. And so now the kid is thought, the kid is lazy. That's the label for the kid. This is just a lazy kid. And it's becoming unbearable for this little cat who starts crying and changing along the way. It's not unusual for personalities to change when people don't understand kids with learning problems. Their personalities will change. Now the school psychologist is involved. Perhaps this kid is in 3rd grade and the kid just wants to run and hide. Every time he's being asked to read out loud, it's emotional, it's embarrassing. And teachers will always call on these kids and want them to participate, and then they're being laughed at. This does happen. And I hear this all the time. Anytime I sit down and I tutor a child, and I could tell when they had a really bad day. And often it's something like this that happens, where they feel embarrassed and it's very emotional. So now the child is in 4th grade, expected to write sentences and paragraphs, but the kid is mixing things up. Now writing becomes a problem. I'm sure some of you have seen this, that by 4th grade, things have switched into a writing problem besides a reading problem. And as more is expected, it's humiliating. And children are getting frustrated, and many times teachers don't know what to do. They think that the kid just doesn't feel like writing. Again, it's thought of as lazy, not motivated. That's another label for these kids. Again, it could even be a bus driver that sees the child, and this child is either sitting by himself after a bad day, not really communicating with some of the other kids, and watching this, but not really understanding. So even the bus driver could be part of this community plan to get people aware of these problems. Librarians should certainly be aware. Often they're not. They recommend books. My daughter's a librarian. They recommend books. They want to get kids motivated, give them the love of reading, but they have to understand that no matter what type of book, kids are not going to be motivated to read unless they can read. They have to understand that that has to come first. And librarians should be trained. That's part of my If Only I Would Have Known book, along with preschool teachers and pediatricians, that the conversation needs to start with the community. They go to the computer lab now, where they have computers in their classroom. Now the child is in 5th grade, and people already gave up trying to teach this child how to hold a pencil. They're not even working on handwriting. They gave up on that maybe in 2nd and 3rd grade. And they're not understanding that this child can't express himself even with a keyboard if he doesn't use both hands to type. So you'll have these little kids still pecking on the keyboard, and they still can't express themselves. And nobody seems to be seeing that this kid is falling further and further and further behind. Now the child is in 6th grade, the principal is involved, and now the behaviors start. Trouble writing, things happening, and the child is starting to act out and might end up in the principal's office. Like I said, it doesn't mean it will happen. Some children hold this in, and when they get home, they let loose on their parents. It really happens differently. Sometimes somebody's home is their safe haven where they let loose when they get home and they hold it all in school. Other times they let loose in school. It really depends. So you have to really look at each case individually, but the principal should be aware of the signs as well. Well, I have a friend who's a guidance counselor, and I could tell you that usually the guidance counselor starts with the emotional issues. What's going on? Oh, he's playing video games and not really communicating or getting involved in school. The guidance counselor needs to know a little bit about reading too. They don't. I have a friend, Trey Hadrick, and he puts up a sound chart in his office now. And this way he has some leveled books and some decodable books in his office. He starts off with the decodable books and he starts asking, could you read that? And he starts recognizing if a child has a problem, and then has the leveled books and starts seeing that the kid is just memorizing words. That's the kind of guidance counselor you would want for your school, someone who understands reading, or at least is interested in reading. I even say that the custodian should be aware of this. How many times are these kids in the hallway? So now this child is in 8th grade, walking the hallways, and they keep seeing this kid somehow doing the wrong thing. Well, maybe if the custodian knew, could have that conversation too, be part of the conversation. Does not always have to be the professional educators in the school having the conversation. Could be anybody. Why not the barber and a minister in a school, around the school district, excuse me. Now the child is in 9th grade. These are the kids who end up in a neighborhood possibly turning to the wrong types of things. Not unusual for kids to start trying to express himself through the clothes he wears, perhaps all in black, trying to kind of separate himself from school. Maybe, a barber or a minister could have that conversation as well. And as you could see, more and more people who start to have the conversation start to try to help the social worker who sees a drug problem. Drug problems don't start out of nowhere. They often start with kids feeling badly about themselves, about the academic issues. And now, unfortunately, it's already too late. Now it could be this kid who ends up going to jail. It's not unusual for kids to have literacy problems, ending up in jails or detention. And already this kid lost hope. Notice this kid is a lion. I didn't point that out along the way, but this little kitty cat along the way turned into a fierce cat and then a lion. So the pictures reflect what's going on in his little body, right? And now a teenager. And the point really is that it really takes a village to help children along the way. And what I want to get across is that this workbook is meant as a tool to raise awareness. It's free, it's on my website. And I think that starting here, having the conversation, even if your child already has been identified with dyslexia, showing this as part of the larger picture would help. Invite the teachers, invite the principal, invite anyone who works with kids, invite the community members to a meeting and use this workbook as a way to have a conversation without it being contentious. I think that would help quite a bit. It's on my website. It's under free resources. And then what I do recommend is having a book club discussion around my book, If Only I Would Have Known. It has been done. I put up videos of actually a group of men having a conversation around my book with the book discussion guide over 3 sessions. And you could see the men changing from the beginning of the session to the 3rd session, where at first they knew nothing about the reading process. And by the end, they wanted to be involved, to the point where there was a barber involved in this book club discussion, opened his barber shop and made it a resource center for decodable books. And everyone who goes into that barber shop now says, "What's that chart on the wall? Well, what are all those books?" And he starts explaining to them what decodable books are. And the reason he was so interested in this is that his own child was struggling to read, and he struggled to read himself. So he wanted to do something for his community. And so he opened it up to make a decodable book bar in the barbershop. And this started with a group of men, 5 Black men. And you could see it, it's on YouTube, and it's fascinating. It's a fascinating conversation. So I do think this idea of having conversations around something like a tool that's easy to understand takes the pressure off of parents who keep feeling like they're complaining. And this way, it's not about their child alone. It's about changing the dialogue. I think that's the point. You want to change the dialogue because teachers get very defensive. I was a teacher. You put your heart and soul into everything. Right now, I do training in school districts. I'm in a district now where we're changing the reading curriculum. And we had buy-in from the assistant superintendent, the superintendent, the teachers, the principals, because they were educated about the problem. That's the very first step. As a teacher, if you don't really understand the problem and you're used to doing what you always did and how you were trained, you get very defensive. You think that you're the problem. You think that the parent is complaining because you must just stink as a teacher. And so the teacher's reaction is to push back. Sometimes teachers will want to help. I'm not saying it's all teachers, but you can understand how certain people could get defensive. This is their careers. They put their heart and souls into it. And I think if they really understood that it's not a parent wanting to just be a pain in the neck, that they're looking for real change for their own child, for other children, and that we don't have to have children falling through the cracks in plain sight, that maybe they would be more open to this dialogue. So I invite people to go to my website, the ifonlybooks.com. I also have my website, highfiveliteracy.com. That's more of a general website. It has my books on it too, but it's a little bit more about me and the work that I do. But this website is specifically designed to give people an understanding of working with the community. That's what it is. It's outreach. So I'm here if you have any questions. I ran through that quickly, but I just want to, and by the way, this is how the workbook is. It has room for 1 month you meet, then 3 months you meet again, 6 months you meet, and everybody has a role. It's an action plan, 9 months, and then a year. So that this way, every time you reconvene, it's a conversation around what you're seeing, what you can do, what your role, like the barber did. That was his role. He opened his barber shop up to have decodable books. Maybe the bus driver could have a role in this, just to be able to, know what's going on, perhaps listen to this child and have a conversation with a parent when the child is getting on or off the bus. Just a 2-minute conversation. You know what? Maybe you should speak to the school. I think it might be a reading problem. As simple as that. So I'm here if you'd like to ask me any questions. We could get out of the share so I could speak to you. If you want to just, open it up where it's more of a conversation, we could do that.
We did have one question in the chat, Faith. Gail asked, are SLP undergraduate and graduate programs bringing attention to the phonemic awareness, dyslexia, speech and language connection?
Yes, so I could tell you that in one district, I did do professional development with SLPs, and it was how reading is tied to speech and language. It was well received. As far as this happening at universities, I can't answer that. It should be happening at the universities, where it should be the OTs and the speech and language pathologists and the education departments all working together as a team. I do believe there is one university, I think it was Seton Hall, pretty sure. You could look it up, Seton Hall, where they do have a collaborative program between writing and speech, I believe. It's all designed for special needs. I think that might be the only program I know of. And I actually heard about it at a conference. I think it was the Everyone Reading Conference in New York, where they talked about this.
The reason why I ask is I'm from New Jersey originally and taught there 33 years and as a special ed teacher, and I ran into that speech and language. They were older speech and language pathologists. So if there's younger ones coming, just as reading programs are starting to develop at the university level, they can go hand in hand. But if someone's only looking for articulation up until 2nd or 3rd grade, then we miss the opportunity to make that phonemic awareness connection.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why, that like this book, the If Only book, I put that in the book. So there's a section in there for the pediatrician, the preschool teacher, and the librarian. But I put speech in there, all the signs, and hopefully that conversation would happen because then people would know. I really think there aren't enough speech and language pathologists understanding this connection. So that's part of the conversation. That's part of community building, just what you're doing. I think it's so amazing that you're having this type of outreach program, and I'm so honored to be a part of it. Thank you. Is there another question, I think?
Yeah, so Amy in the chat said, where do we get our most return on investment? Special ed chair, principal, board of ed, board of regents? Who do I spend most of my time talking with?
That's a great question.
Oh, that is a great question. That is a really good question. So my feeling is that parents are the drivers of change. Through this whole thing, it's really the parents. That's why when I wrote my books, it always had parents involved. Now, you would think as a teacher, I would direct most of my work to other teachers or other educators. But I hate to say this, but having been in the schools for so long, I did feel that it was easier to go outside the school building than within the school building. And so my very first book was called Reading Intervention Behind School Walls, Why Your Child Continues to Struggle. And it's part memoir, it's my story. And then that book was republished as Failing Students or Failing Schools. And it really shows how difficult it was for me to make change within the school system. I feel that working outside the school system, almost a backdoor approach, is easier. And when parents know, and enough parents know, where it's not just parents of dyslexic children, but parents with kids in gen ed, that they understand that, you know what, your kid might not have the same difficulties or the profound reading problems that my kid has, but don't be so sure that this doesn't catch up later on, because spelling is affected, writing is affected. I've had parents contact me when their kids are already in 6th grade and above. And the signs weren't there earlier on, but only later did they start falling further behind. So I do think it's easier to work with parent groups than starting with the school district. So I would say PTA meetings, joining up with SEPTA. Do you call it SEPTA by you? Is it called SEPTA, Special Ed Parent Teacher Association? What do you call yours? I don't know.
I don't know that we have, like, usually there's like advisory groups that each district has that
Oh,
are
interesting.
for special ed parents. And I know the State Department has one as well, but I know like just PTA, like there are, like for each school there are.
Yeah, so, okay, so I could give you a little advice. So here on Long Island, we have PTAs and we have SEPTAs. So the PTA is the Gen Ed Parent Teacher Association. But many parents of students with special needs did not feel that their needs were being met. So they started to form chapters called SEPTAs, Special Ed PTAs. That's what it stands for. And they get together and they do programming specifically designed for their needs. But what I have found is when they get together, PTAs and SEPTAs, and they start talking and they pool their resources together to have presentations such as this, where it shouldn't just be a meeting for parents of kids with dyslexia, it broadens the scope. And then parents realize, hey, I'm a taxpayer. This is not just a problem with dyslexia. You know, if I'm paying, I want the best. I want my kids learning how to read correctly. I don't want to have to start taking my kids after school for tutoring and writing and all these other things. So I do think that parent organizations should broaden the scope. That's what I'm saying. So go through parent organizations, but try to get the gen ed parents to understand that this is their problem too. I don't think they do. I think they see parents of children with special needs, whether it's autism or dyslexia, that doesn't affect me. You know, I understand, I sympathize with you, but that doesn't affect me. But it really does. And it does affect them more than they think. And if it's not with one child, it could be with their second child or third child. That happens too. I've worked with parents where 2 of their kids went through school and they were just fine. And then it was their youngest child. And then it was a different story. Many of my clients are in the teaching profession. I've said that 75% of parents who come to me are in education because they know they're not going to get satisfaction in school. So I've had reading teachers bring their kids to me because they didn't know how to help their own children. I've had principals. I've had administrators. I've had classroom teachers and special ed teachers bring their kids to me to tutor their children. But what I tell them is, if I help your child, you have to pay it forward. Now that you understand, now it's your turn, you have to pay it forward. If I'm going to help your child, you have to be vocal. And I have to say, my parents that I've worked with do become vocal because they see the difference. Once they know how reading should be taught and they watch me, one of the things I do as a tutor is I have an open door policy. So whether it was in person or online, I want parents watching what I'm doing. I don't shut the door and say, I do this, I'll tell you about it after. I encourage parents to sit in and make them partners so they could become advocates. That is a very important point for me. And so if I've had, teachers sitting in, now you know how to teach. I just trained your child and now I trained you. Now you know what's going on. You could now speak up. And that, I think, is a really good way to get change. I wish other tutors would do that too, that they would almost train the parents while they're training the kids. I think it's effective. I think that's how you get more people involved and able to feel educated enough to talk up. So I could tell you, I mentioned Trey Hadrick before. He's the guidance counselor that I met during the pandemic. I tutored his child online during COVID. That's how we met. And I encouraged him to sit in, and I encouraged his wife to sit in while I tutored his son, Ernesto. Within 6 or 7 months, Ernesto was reading multisyllable words, and he thought it was magical. I said, it's nothing magical about it. When you know what you're doing and you can teach these kids, they can learn. That's when he made it his business to start getting involved with trying to get the science of reading in his district. He was always interested in reading. He was Mr. Lit before I started working with his kid, but he thought it was a matter of just motivating Black kids to read. He wanted, he wanted to be a role model and say, yeah, we need to get Black kids reading and get boys reading more. And that, of course, is commendable. But he did not realize that the underlying problem is the instruction. And now he is this proponent for the science of reading. And I'm working with him in the Norristown School District, with the barber, with people in the community, and working with their career and technical education school. Trey teaches in a CTE program, career and technical education. And so now I'm working with high school students who want to become teachers. And they essentially go into early childhood education, and they read my book, these high school students. It's easy enough for 16, 17, and 18-year-old students to understand. And we used my If Only book as a book club study for them. And now they're doing some student work in the local elementary school. And hopefully they're able to start implementing some of these strategies. So that's the way community grows. That's the way you start getting people involved. So we're doing like a little pilot program in Norristown, Pennsylvania. And I'm in New York. I bet you couldn't tell. But with my accent. But I've been working with this community in Pennsylvania, trying to get them to be advocates for themselves, to be able to know what to do and to be able to talk up. Any other questions? Okay. So I thank you for having me. I would be very happy to continue this work. Hopefully, we could have more conversations. And I do hope that you take a look at that free workbook that's on my website, because I do think it's there. It's a great start to having this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faith. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I know that this is being recorded and will be on our website. Not sure at what point, but thank you all for coming. Look out for our future events. We're going to be doing some more community chats, and hopefully we'll see you all there.
Thank you.